I never meant to find it. That's the first thing I need you to understand. I wasn't snooping or searching for evidence. I was simply trying to be helpful. That morning had been like any other. Thomas left early for work, kissing me on the forehead while I pretended to still be asleep. I'd developed that habit over 15 years of marriage, feigning sleep to avoid the morning small talk that had grown increasingly strained between us. The washing machine was making that horrible grinding noise again, and I remembered Thomas saying he'd put the warranty card somewhere in his office drawer. That's when I found it, nestled beneath old receipts and forgotten business cards, a sleek black phone I'd never seen before. At first, I thought it must belong to someone at his office. Thomas worked in consulting and often brought home devices for testing. But when I pressed the power button and saw it was charged, something cold settled in my stomach. The lock screen showed only the time, no notifications, no personalization, just a clean, anonymous interface. I sat there in his office chair, turning the phone over in my hands, telling myself there was a logical explanation. Thomas wasn't the type to have secrets. He was predictable, sometimes painfully so. The kind of man who ate the same breakfast every day and sorted his socks by color. We'd built our life on that predictability. Our modest house in Connecticut, our weekend routines, the way we moved around each other in comfortable silence. This doesn't mean anything, I whispered to myself, placing the phone back exactly where I found it, but I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. That night, I watched Thomas across the dinner table, searching his face for signs of the stranger who might own that second phone. He looked the same as always, slightly tired around the eyes, his dark hair beginning to gray at the temples, talking about an upcoming project with his usual measured enthusiasm. "Emily from accounting is leaving," he said, between bites of the pasta I'd barely touched. "They're having a goodbye thing on Friday." I nodded, wondering if Emily knew about the phone, if she was somehow connected to this new knot of dread in my chest. "Will you be late?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Probably not. You know how these office things go." He smiled, and for a second, I saw the Thomas I'd fallen in love with, the one whose smile used to make my heart skip. When had that feeling faded? When had we become these polite strangers sharing meals and mortgage payments? I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake listening to Thomas's steady breathing, wondering how many nights he'd lain awake next to me, thinking of someone else. The next morning, I waited until he left for work, then went straight to his office. The phone was gone. For 3 days, I said nothing. I watched him, looking for clues. A secretive smile at his own phone, unexplained absences, the small tells I'd read about in articles with titles like 10 Signs He's Cheating. But Thomas remained frustratingly normal. He came home on time, helped with dinner, watched our usual shows on Netflix. If anything, he seemed more attentive, asking about my day, suggesting we plan a weekend getaway soon. On the 4th day, I called in sick to work. As soon as Thomas left, I began searching. Not just his office this time, but everywhere. I checked coat pockets, the garage, even the sealed boxes in the attic. Nothing. I was beginning to think I'd imagined the whole thing when I noticed the loose floorboard in his closet, the one he'd promised to fix months ago. The phone was there, wrapped in a plain handkerchief, and this time, I didn't hesitate. I pressed the power button, prepared to face whatever truth awaited me. The screen asked for a passcode, 4 digits standing between me and whatever truth Thomas was hiding. I tried our anniversary, 0624. Nothing. His birthday, 0817. Nothing. My birthday, his mother's birthday, the year we met. Nothing worked. I sat cross-legged on the closet floor, the morning light barely reaching this hidden corner of our shared life, and tried to think like a man with secrets. What numbers would Thomas choose that I wouldn't guess? Then it hit me. The address of his first apartment, before we met. He'd always talked about those days with a strange nostalgia. 1520. I typed it in, and the phone unlocked. There weren't many apps, just messages, photos, and a password manager. My fingers hovered over the messages icon, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear it. One tap, and there they were. Dozens of conversations, all with the same person. Someone saved only as J. The messages went back months. I scrolled to the beginning, needing to understand how and when this parallel life had started. Still thinking about yesterday. The first message from Jay read, "You're not what I expected, Thomas Sullivan." "Good unexpected, or bad unexpected," Thomas had replied. "Definitely good. Very good." I felt sick reading their exchanges. They weren't explicitly sexual. That would have been easier to categorize, to file away as just physical betrayal. Instead, they were intimate in a way Thomas and I hadn't been for years. Inside jokes, book recommendations, deep conversations about fears and dreams, photos of ordinary moments, a sunset, a coffee shop table, a park bench with autumn leaves. The invisible thread connecting these images was clear. These were places they'd been together, moments they'd shared while I thought he was working late or meeting clients. "My wife wants to plan a vacation." One message from Thomas read from just 2 weeks ago. "Feeling trapped. Need to see you." "Soon," Jay had responded. "We'll figure it out. Always do." I scrolled through months of their lives, trying to match the dates with my memories. The night I'd waited dinner until it went cold, and he'd claimed his train was delayed. The weekend workshop that ran long. The countless work emergencies that pulled him away from family gatherings. All lies. I opened the photos next, bracing myself for intimate images, but instead finding something that hurt even more. Thomas smiling, really smiling, in a way I hadn't seen in years. Thomas and a woman with curly dark hair at a restaurant I didn't recognize. Thomas in a hotel room, the sheets rumpled behind him as he took a mirror selfie, his expression relaxed and playful. The woman, Jay, wasn't conventionally beautiful, but there was something striking about her. She looked creative, with interesting jewelry and bright clothes, the opposite of my practical wardrobe and sensible haircut. In one photo, they were at what looked like an art gallery, champagne glasses in hand, her head thrown back in laughter, while Thomas looked at her with unmistakable adoration. I sat there for what felt like hours, piecing together their relationship from these digital fragments. The password manager revealed even more: a separate email account, login details for hotel booking sites, even a savings account I knew nothing about. He'd been planning something. Perhaps leaving me. Perhaps just maintaining this double life indefinitely. A text notification suddenly appeared at the top of the screen. "Can't wait for this weekend. 2 whole days. No interruptions. This weekend." When Thomas had told me he was attending a conference in Boston, when I'd offered to drive him to the train station, and he'd insisted on taking a taxi, I put the phone back exactly as I'd found it, hands no longer shaking. The initial shock had crystallized into something harder, colder. I stood up, brushed the closet dust from my knees, and walked to our bedroom. Our wedding photo sat on the dresser, younger versions of ourselves smiling with all the certainty of people who thought they knew what the future held. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my laptop and began to search for divorce lawyers in our area. But as I typed, another idea started to form, one that made me close the browser and reach for my own phone instead. Friday morning arrived with uncomfortable normalcy. Thomas packed an overnight bag while I made coffee, performing my role as the oblivious wife with Oscar-worthy precision. He'd been unusually chatty all week, perhaps compensating for what was coming. The conference program he'd left on the kitchen counter looked convincing. I had to give him credit for attention to detail. He'd even highlighted sessions he was particularly interested in. "I should be back Sunday evening," he said, kissing my cheek. "Don't wait up if I'm late." "Have a good time," I replied, and meant it, though not in the way he thought. I waited exactly 30 minutes after he left before calling a car service. I'd already packed my own bag the night before, while Thomas showered. Not the weekend getaway I'd imagined for us. But here we were. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. "South Station, please." My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Calm, almost detached. I didn't know exactly where Thomas was headed, but I had a hunch. If I was wrong, I'd wasted some money and a weekend. If I was right, well, I still hadn't decided what I'd do then. South Station was crowded with Friday travelers. I spotted Thomas immediately, standing near the schedule board, checking his watch. He wasn't dressed for a business conference. No suit, no briefcase. Instead, he wore jeans and a blue sweater I'd never seen before. He looked younger somehow, almost like a stranger. I kept my distance, hidden behind a newspaper kiosk, watching as he bought a ticket. Not to Boston, but to Providence. When his train was announced, I bought a ticket for the same one, boarding a different car. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 15 years of marriage, I was following my husband like a character in some domestic thriller novel. The ride to Providence took just under an hour. I trailed Thomas through the station, maintaining a careful distance. Outside, he hailed a taxi, and I quickly did the same, telling my driver, "Follow that car, please." The driver gave me a look I couldn't quite decipher. Pity, perhaps, or understanding. We drove through Providence, past Brown University, and into a neighborhood of converted warehouses and art galleries. The taxi stopped in front of a modern apartment building with large windows and a rooftop garden. Thomas paid his driver and entered the building without hesitation, using a key card I never knew he had. "Should I wait?" my driver asked. "No," I said. "I'll be fine." I sat on a bench across the street, watching the building as twilight settled over the city. Lights came on in apartments, lives illuminated in rectangular frames. On the 4th floor, a corner unit lit up, and I saw them, Thomas and the dark-haired woman from the photos, embracing in the window for a brief moment before moving deeper into the apartment. The pain I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt an odd sense of clarity, as if seeing Thomas in his other life had finally freed me from some long-held illusion. I took out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I booked a hotel room just for myself, a nice one by the water. That night, I sat on the hotel balcony overlooking the harbor, drinking wine and making lists in a notebook. Assets to divide, friends to notify, a new place to live, the future I'd need to build. It should have been terrifying, but instead, I felt strangely focused. I didn't follow Thomas the next day. Instead, I walked around Providence, a city I'd visited with him only once years ago. I found a small art gallery and spent hours there, really looking at the paintings in a way I never had time for before. I ate lunch alone at a cafe with outdoor seating, watching people pass by. I bought a dress I would never have chosen with Thomas beside me. Too bright, too bold. Sunday afternoon, I took the train back to Connecticut, arriving home before Thomas. I put away my new dress, made myself dinner, and waited. He came through the door at 8, looking tired but relaxed in that particular way people do after a weekend of doing exactly what they want. "How was the conference?" I asked, looking up from my book. Good. Lots of useful sessions." He set down his bag and smiled, that familiar smile that had once meant everything to me. "How was your weekend?" "Quiet." I marked my place in the book and met his eyes. "Actually, I had quite an interesting weekend in Providence." His face went completely still, color draining away as if someone had pulled a plug. And in that moment, looking at his naked panic, I realized I had all the power I needed. The silence that followed my words seemed to stretch into infinity. Thomas stood frozen in our entryway, his hand still on the handle of his overnight bag. I watched emotions flicker across his face like a slide projector. Shock, fear, calculation, and finally, a strange sort of resignation. "You followed me," he said. Not a question, but a statement. His voice was hollow. "I did." I remained seated, oddly calm. "After I found your other phone, the one under the loose floorboard." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he looked different, older somehow, but also more authentic than he had in years. "How long have you known? Does it matter? A few days? Long enough." I set my book aside. "Her name starts with J. Jessica? Jennifer? Julia?" "Julianne," he said quietly. "Her name is Julianne." Hearing him say her name made it real in a way the messages and photos hadn't. Julianne. A woman with a name, a life, a relationship with my husband that existed completely separate from mine. "How long?" I asked. Thomas moved into the living room but didn't sit. He paced instead, running his hands through his hair. "1.5 years. We met at a client meeting. She's a graphic designer. 1.5 years. 18 months of deception layered over our daily routines. Breakfasts and dinners and holidays and anniversaries, all shadowed by lies I hadn't detected. What did that say about our marriage? About me? Are you in love with her?" The question surprised even me. I hadn't planned to ask it. Wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Thomas looked at me directly for the first time since coming home. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." The honesty stung more than any excuse would have. I nodded, absorbing the blow. And what exactly was your plan here, Thomas? Keep living two separate lives indefinitely? Or were you working up the courage to leave? He sat down heavily on the armchair across from me. I don't know. Both. Neither. He looked down at his hands. I didn't want to hurt you. A laugh escaped me, sharp and bitter. Well, that worked out brilliantly. I know it sounds ridiculous, he said, but it's true. I never meant for any of this to happen. Julianne and I, we just connected in ways that you and I haven't in a long time. Don't you dare blame this on our marriage, I said, my calm finally cracking. You had choices. Every day for 18 months, you chose deception. You chose to build a life with someone else instead of trying to fix what we had. Would you have wanted me to try? He asked, and the genuine curiosity in his voice made me pause. Be honest, Kate. Were you happy before you found out? The question hit me like cold water. Was I happy? I thought back to our routines, our comfortable silences, the way we moved around each other with practiced efficiency. We functioned well together. I'd always been proud of that. But happiness? The kind that makes your chest ache with fullness? I was content, I finally said. I thought that's what happened in long marriages. The passion fades, and you're left with partnership. Thomas nodded slowly. That's what I thought too, until Julianne. Then I realized what I was missing, what we both were missing. So that makes it okay? Finding what you're missing by lying to me for over a year? No, he said. It doesn't. I was a coward. I should have talked to you. I should have ended things properly before starting something new. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the windows of the house we'd chosen together, painted together, filled with furniture we'd argued over and art we'd collected on trips. Our shared history sat in every corner. She knows about me, I said, another realization hitting me. In those messages, you talked about me. Your wife. She knew you were married and she didn't care. She cared, Thomas said. We both did. It's complicated. It's really not, I replied, standing up. Betrayal is actually quite simple. You make promises, and then you break them. Everything else is just justification. I walked to the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. I want you to leave, I said. Tonight. Pack what you need for now. We can figure out the rest later. Kate, I mean it, Thomas. I can't look at you right now without seeing you with her, in that apartment. In that life you built while dismantling ours. He didn't argue. Perhaps he was relieved. A clean break instead of more deception. I listened as he went upstairs, opened drawers, zipped a larger bag. When he came back down, I didn't turn from the window. For what it's worth, he said from the doorway. I did love you. I still do, in a way. Just not enough, I replied. Go be with Julianne. I hope she's worth all this wreckage. The door closed behind him, and I was alone in the house that no longer felt like home. The days after Thomas left blurred together. I moved through our house like a ghost, touching objects that suddenly felt like artifacts from someone else's life. The coffee mug he always used, the throw blanket he'd wrap around himself on Sunday mornings, his books, still lined up alphabetically on the shelf because he couldn't stand disorder. I called in sick to work for a week, unable to face questions or sympathy. My sister Emma came over after I finally told her everything, bringing wine and takeout and righteous anger. What an absolute bastard, she fumed, pouring me another glass. 15 years, and this is how he repays you? With some hipster graphic designer in Providence? I'd shown her the photos I'd taken of his secret phone screen, a violation of privacy that seemed laughably insignificant compared to his betrayal. I keep thinking I should have known, I said, picking at the food I couldn't taste. There must have been signs. Stop that, Emma said firmly. This is not on you. He made these choices. He hid them deliberately. Don't you dare take responsibility for his actions. She stayed the night, sleeping in the guest room that still held traces of Thomas, his winter sweaters in the closet, his extra reading glasses in the drawer. The next morning, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. I rushed downstairs to find Emma in the living room, our wedding photo shattered on the floor. Sorry, she said, not looking sorry at all. It slipped. I stared at the broken frame, at younger versions of ourselves smiling amid glittering shards. Something loosened in my chest, and suddenly I was laughing. A real laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep and surprising. "Hand me that one," I said, pointing to our anniversary trip to Maine. Emma grinned and passed it to me. The crash it made against the floor was immensely satisfying. By noon, we'd broken every framed photo of Thomas and me together. It was childish, destructive, and exactly what I needed. We swept up the glass and carried the photos to the fire pit in the backyard, watching as flames curled around paper memories. "What will you do now?" Emma asked as we sat watching the fire. "Divorce him," I said, the words still strange on my tongue. "Sell the house. Start over somewhere. You can stay with me until you figure it out," she offered, squeezing my hand. The news spread quickly after that. Thomas's parents called, his mother crying, his father gruffly apologetic. "We didn't raise him to behave this way," he said, as if their parenting was the issue. My parents drove up from Philadelphia, my mother taking charge of practical matters, helping me find a lawyer, cataloging assets, researching the house value, while my father quietly fixed things around the house that Thomas had left undone. Friends reacted with varying degrees of shock and discomfort. Some rallied around me with casseroles and invitations. Others grew distant, particularly couples we'd known for years. Betrayal, I discovered, made people nervous, as if infidelity might be contagious. Brian and Diane, our neighbors for a decade, invited me for dinner 2 weeks after Thomas left. The evening was excruciating. Their careful avoidance of his name, their overly bright interest in my plans, the way they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking. "We've actually seen Thomas," Diane finally said over dessert, unable to contain herself. "At Westfield Mall last weekend. He was with someone." "Julianne," I supplied, taking a bite of cheesecake I couldn't taste. Dark curly hair, lots of jewelry, about 35. Their matching expressions of shock might have been comical under different circumstances. "You know about her?" Brian asked. "I know everything," I said simply. No need to tiptoe around it. On my way home, I realized I'd referred to Julianne as if I knew her. In some strange way, I did. I knew she read poetry, preferred oat milk in her coffee, and laughed with her whole body. I knew she made Thomas feel alive in ways I apparently hadn't for years. I knew she was waiting for him to finalize our divorce, based on the legal papers that arrived at the house the following week. The divorce process itself was surprisingly civilized. Thomas didn't contest anything, agreeing to an even split of assets and the sale of the house. We communicated through lawyers, sterile emails, and one excruciatingly polite coffee meeting where we divided the more sentimental items neither lawyer could value. "You should keep the pottery from Mexico," he said, referring to pieces we'd bought on our 10th anniversary trip. "You always loved them more than I did." "You take the record collection," I countered. "Most of it was yours before we met anyway." We sat across from each other like business associates concluding a moderately successful partnership. No tears, no recriminations, just the quiet dismantling of 15 years, itemized and initialed on legal notepaper. As we were about to leave, Thomas hesitated. "Kate, Don't," I interrupted. "We don't need to do this part. You're building a life with Julianne. I'm building one without you. Let's just leave it at that." He nodded, relief evident in his expression. We walked out of the coffee shop and turned in opposite directions without saying goodbye. It felt fitting. Our marriage hadn't ended with a dramatic confrontation or tearful pleas, but with a gradual, deliberate separation of lives once intertwined. The house sold quickly, a young couple with a toddler and another baby on the way. They walked through rooms that had once contained my marriage, pointing excitedly at spaces where they'd put a crib, a play area, a family dining table. I watched them envision their future in the shell of my past and felt an unexpected lightness. These walls deserved new stories. With the house sale finalized and divorce papers signed, I took the leap I'd been contemplating for months. I quit my job at the accounting firm where I'd worked for 12 years, packed 2 suitcases and a laptop, and rented a small apartment in Boston's North End, a neighborhood I'd always loved during weekend trips, but that Thomas had found too touristy. My new place was tiny by Connecticut standards. 1 bedroom with exposed brick walls, tall windows that let in morning light, and a kitchen barely big enough for a bistro table. But it was mine alone, and that made it perfect. "You're either very brave or completely insane," my mother said during our weekly phone call, starting over at 42. "Maybe both," I answered, watching pedestrians on the narrow street below my window. "But I couldn't stay, Mom. Everything there reminded me of him. What will you do for work? Boston isn't cheap." It was a fair question. The divorce settlement and house sale had given me financial breathing room, but not indefinitely. Surprisingly, I wasn't panicked about it. The old Kate would have had a 5-year plan, spreadsheets, and contingency options. The new Kate was learning to embrace uncertainty. "I'm doing some freelance bookkeeping for now," I told her. "And I've applied to a master's program in arts administration at Boston University." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. My parents had always valued stability above all else, a value they'd successfully instilled in me until now. "That sounds interesting," my mother finally said, her voice carefully neutral. "Is that something you've always wanted to do?" The truth was, I hadn't known I wanted it until recently. After Thomas left, I'd started volunteering at our local community arts center, initially just to fill empty evening hours. But I'd discovered a genuine passion for the work, connecting artists with resources, organizing exhibitions, building community programs. It felt meaningful in ways balancing corporate ledgers never had. "It's something I want to do now," I said simply. "I'm allowed to change, Mom." That first summer in Boston was a revelation. I explored the city alone, finding secret courtyards and hidden bookshops. I took a pottery class where I created lopsided bowls and imperfect mugs that brought me more joy than any perfectly matched dinnerware set. I ate at restaurant bars, striking up conversations with bartenders and fellow solo diners. I learned that being alone didn't have to mean being lonely. One evening in August, I was sketching the harbor from a bench on the waterfront when a voice interrupted my concentration. "That's really good," the man said, gesturing to my drawing. "You've captured the light beautifully." He was about my age, with salt and pepper hair and glasses. Under normal circumstances, meaning my entire adult life until now, I would have mumbled a thank you and closed my sketchbook, uncomfortable with both the attention and the interruption of my solitude. Instead, I surprised myself. "Thank you. I'm just learning, actually. Are you an artist?" His name was David, a high school art teacher with summer off. We ended up talking until sunset, then continuing over dinner at a nearby restaurant. The conversation flowed easily, about art, teaching, books we'd read, places we'd traveled. Not once did I find myself performing the careful self-editing I'd grown accustomed to with Thomas, measuring my enthusiasm against his potential disinterest. "We should do this again," David said, as we parted outside the restaurant. Not presumptuous, just open, hopeful. "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. But as I walked home, I realized I wasn't ready for whatever might come next. The evening had been lovely, but my heart was still learning its own rhythms after so long beating alongside another's. I texted him the next day, thanking him for dinner and being honest about needing time. His response was gracious. "No pressure. Friends is good too." We did become friends, meeting occasionally for gallery openings or coffee. David introduced me to artist communities I wouldn't have found on my own. I introduced him to podcasts that made him laugh. It was easy, uncomplicated by expectations. Fall arrived, bringing with it my first semester of graduate school. At orientation, surrounded by classmates mostly in their 20s, I felt momentarily out of place, the middle-aged woman starting over. But as courses began, I discovered my life experience was an unexpected advantage. I approached discussions with perspectives younger students hadn't yet developed. Professors valued my practical knowledge. For the first time in years, I felt intellectually alive. One October evening, I FaceTimed with Emma from my apartment, the windows open to the crisp autumn air. My course book spread across the table. "You look different," she said, studying me through the screen. "Happier." I touched my face unconsciously. I'd cut my hair shorter, started wearing bolder colors, but the change went deeper than appearance. "I feel different," I admitted. "More myself, somehow. As if I've been playing a role for so long I forgot who I really was." "Do you ever hear from him?" she asked, the question she'd been carefully avoiding. Thomas? No. I realized I hadn't thought about him in days. The sharp pain of betrayal had dulled to something more like distant recognition. Acknowledgement of a wound that had shaped me but no longer defined me. Do you regret it? The marriage? I considered the question seriously, looking around at my small, vibrant apartment, at the student ID visible on my desk, at the half-finished painting on my easel. No, I said finally. I don't regret the marriage, or even the way it ended. Without both, I might never have found this version of myself, and I like her. I really do.